Hey, what's up guys? It's Alec from Cichlid Bros. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you 5 tips on how to make your cichlids grow faster as well as maximize their growth potential. So let's dive right in. Watching your fish grow can be one of the most rewarding parts of the fish hobby, especially with cichlid keeping. When you typically see a cichlid at a fish store or a pet store, you typically will find them at 1 to 2 inches in size, just like the other fish in the fish store. But with cichlids, as you can see, can grow to be much larger than that. So it obviously can be quite the rewarding process. There are just a few things that you need to be aware of as the fish keeper to help facilitate that growth so those fish can grow quickly to be happy and healthy, huge, full potential, full color adults. So let's get right into tip number 1. My first tip is to make sure you are feeding your fish appropriately. Now, when you're growing out fish, say you buy a 1 or 2 inch fish, you are probably going to be feeding a little bit more frequently or maybe a little bit more at one time. Some people say that you need to feed your fry maybe 2 or 3 times a day. I haven't found that to be the case. My fish have grown just fine from 1 feeding a day, but I do monitor them and watch them carefully every time I do feed them to make sure all the fish are well fed and I'm not overfeeding them and leaving food on the bottom of the tank that will mess up the water quality. You also want to make sure you feed your fish an evolutionarily appropriate diet. For example, I have large haps in this tank to my right over here, which are predators from Lake Malawi, and over my left shoulder here are mbuna, which are kind of vegetarian algae-based eaters from Lake Malawi. So they have 2 very different nutritional needs. The predator haps need a more protein-based diet. The mbuna need a more veggie-based diet. And also the sizes of them are different. So the size of the pellets that they eat are different as well. So for example, I feed extreme big fella pellets to my predator hap tank. That's 3mm pellets. They can actually take up to 9mm pellets. However, I've noticed that it makes a big, huge mess when I try to push the size of the pellets. So I stick to smaller pellets that they can eat more of. It tends to be a more clean meal for them, and it seems like they take in more food overall rather than focusing on chewing and spitting out those big pellets over and over again, which leaves them with less food and more of a mess. But the extreme big fella is more of a protein-based food, so that works really well for them. For my mbuna, I have veggie pellets from Northfin. There are other brands that you can use as well, but these are 1mm, so very small for my smaller mbuna. Mbuna are naturally smaller, but I am also growing these out back here in this tank. So the 1mm fits perfect. They can handle a lot more of the pellets. Same principle as feeding the smaller pellets for the big fish. Another good food is the spirulina flakes, which almost any fish can take in. But the bottom line is you want to make sure the foods that you feed your fish are being eaten, not left on the ground, and that they are digesting them properly, and it is what they would eat in the wild. So feeding your fish properly leads directly to my next point. Tip number 2, maintain great water quality in your aquariums. And the best way to do that is frequent water changes. The number 1 cause of disease and death in fish is poor water quality. So by no means am I suggesting that full-grown fish like in this tank here don't need frequent water changes as well. It just might be even more important when you're growing fish out, trying to maximize their growth, that you get those maybe even more frequent water changes. Like a frequent water change schedule for this tank is about once a week. You might up that to every 5 days if you really want to maximize growth potential in young fish. And also young fish are a little bit more sensitive to poor water quality, so high nitrates in a full-grown tank might not seem like as big of a deal, whereas it might be very much a big deal in a grow-out tank. So it's just a great way to make sure you're safe with those water parameters and nitrates. And also the constant influx of frequent new fresh water will help stimulate that growth hormone in those fish and will have them getting huge in no time. My third tip to maximize your fish growth is to use a grow-out tank. You can't really tell because they're still a little camera shy, not used to being on camera yet, but behind me in this tank I have 6 baby mbuna that I bought 2 months ago. I put them in this tank just to quarantine them before I added them to my mbuna show tank, and what I noticed was they were eating and growing and thriving in this tank a lot more than I think they would in the show tank because there's only 6 fish in here. There's not a lot of competition for food. There are no bigger fish in there to stress them out. So they get a belly full of food every night and they are happy and healthy and kind of becoming alpha males that I cannot wait to add to the show tank as they grow. I decided that I'm gonna leave them in here for as long as I can, probably until my next Mbuna shipment before I add them to the show tank because they are growing so well. Having a grow out tank is great for when you already have an established tank with bigger cichlids in it. But my 4th tip is great for if you don't have that tank established yet, and that is put your new fish in as big of a tank as possible. Behind me here is a 180 gallon Mbuna tank that I set up a few months ago. And after quarantining the fish, I put them directly into the 180. And while it looks a little bit silly with how small they are, with how big the tank is, I think it's really contributed to their growth for a number of factors. The most obvious one, and that is water dilution. The more water volume there is, the more it will dilute any waste. And if there's any water parameter issues, you'll have more time to fix that issue before it becomes too toxic to your fish. There's also just more space for them, and there's more hiding spots and more places for them to just become more comfortable. I also, for my predator hap tank, started my fish at 1 inches and they are now 14 inches, and I put them directly into a 125 gallon tank even when there's only 8 of them and they're 1 inch long. And I really am a firm believer that all that water volume really helped them grow fast. For my 5th tip, I will say be patient. So anytime you buy a fish, I think you should research the fish to see how fast it should grow and how big it should eventually grow. You might buy a Malawi hawk like I have and expect it to get 4 inches or 14 inches like I have in 2 or 3 years, but after a couple of years, it's still only 6 inches. You just gotta know that there are a lot of other factors. Even if you do things perfect, there are a lot of other factors that could result in a fish not growing quite as fast. There might be a rogue fish picking on them, or that fish might just be a runt or a slow grower. And every individual fish is different with their personalities and their growth rates. So I think if you are patient and you know your fish and you're putting the right stock list together and you have them in the right size tank, treating each fish individually and giving them the best situation to thrive, it's all the same principles to make them grow faster. So as long as you're making them be in a situation where they can thrive and they are not in a bad setup like having peacocks or Mbuna in a massive predator hap tank where they might get overly stressed out, be patient, eventually they will get there. So like I said, there are a lot of other factors that go into maximizing your fish growth. Those are just 5 of my favorite tips. Let us know in the comment section below what your favorite tips and tricks are to maximizing your fish growth. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.